So welcome back to Public Interest Technology, Co-Designing the Future. That's PIT 502 in the Masters of Science, Public Interest Technology. Now, we finished off uh, with the lived experience and authenticity and professional expertise. And we're going now to describe co-design phases. And we begin by offering four definitions, four of a gazillion online. Co-design is the act of creating with stakeholders, specifically within the design development process, to ensure the results meet their needs and are usable. And they point to business or customers here. Co-design may also be called participatory design, a term which is used more often within the design community. And we'll look at whether participatory design or participative design is actually really co-design. And others have described it as an approach to design attempting to actively involve all stakeholders, employers, partners, customers, citizens, and end users in the design process to help ensure the result meets their needs. Like 70% of large IT projects, friends, fail because they have not talked to end users. The system does not meet the needs and so forth. And the final one up here, co-design is not just a process or an approach, but it's a movement. It's a set of methods and mindsets. It's challenging the imbalance of power often held within select groups or individuals. So I've gone to this particular website beyond design notes. And this is the 7 steps we're using. We're going to build the conditions, we're going to immerse and align, we're going to discover, we're going to design, test and refine, implement and learn, and then have a pitch day. A pitch day that could also be a demo day, depending on how far we get with wireframes and possibly even some kind of workflow or process or level of coordination. I've described them as 7 phases. In your particular workplace, if you've been doing co-design, it may be more or less. They may even use the same names or different names. But I want you to start thinking about a process to be embedded in absolutely every aspect that you do in the workplace, whether it's for government or whether it's for industry. And what you'll see with one of the videos that I do with a veteran, formerly with NXP Semiconductors, Mike Stanley, is that we go through and we talk about these phases. And what he says is that the more they've become refined and developed, the more they stick to them and the more they get better at doing them. And so at the beginning, when you're trying to implement this in your workplace, it might be really, really hard. But over time, you get to have a feeling for the number of days, depending on the size of the project, how many human persons you might actually bring together, how much funding you might need. And these are numbers you can only figure out after you've done quite a few. I'd say between 100 or 200. That's when you really start to garner partner level experience, where you can demonstrate that you've had exposure to these projects, you understand the phases or the gates very well, you're willing to be flexible to an extreme, but that's an exceptional circumstance. And so you then become quite quantified, if I can put it like that, at addressing all of these things. The innovation in this process comes in what you're asking at what stage, what you're eliciting from the user, how you're going to analyze that, how you're going to discover things, and how you're going to meet that. And the creativity is what we're really talking about in design thinking. I'm not going to sit there marking, the wrong triangle for the swim lane. I'm more concerned about your conceptual grasp of what's going on, and then how you're going to modularize that and break it down, deconstruct the problem so that you are able to offer a complete way forward. So here's another example: engage, plan, explore, develop, decide, change. Another one, this one from the World Text in New Zealand. Another, here we've got outcomes of agile co-design methodology. That's interesting, I found. I like the stuff in the blue boxes because that's the way you actually get the information, collect the data. And so we are going to be talking about stakeholder analysis and personas, different types of users, scenarios, as is and into the future to be in the next rectangle. Technology show and tell. Well, I wouldn't introduce technology this early on um, in the development process, but you can if you want to. You can start simultaneously thinking about scenarios because they have to be technically possible. And of course, that is very much linked to a feasibility study. Brainstorming by using storyboarding techniques, refinement of the storyboard so you don't waste money along the track. In the interview with Mike Stanley, we talk about uh, simulating early for the manufacturing of integrated circuit chips and getting it right very early on. And we might have in applications use cases, especially if they're mobile apps, but really any sort of technological solution, and activity diagrams, whether they're data flow diagrams or entity relationship diagrams or anything other that is useful in that area. And finally, implementation, an iterative development process and an incremental delivery. But again, here's another view from another paper on stages and methods of a co-design process. It's called The Scope of the Dialogue Lab's Methods Cover. And so here's a very long-winded, this step and this step and this step and this step. And your organization may have different steps for different kinds of projects. You may miss out a few depending on how detailed the customer wants to go, depending on the level of research that's required. Here's another one. I tend to like this one a lot, particularly because of these beautiful statements at the top: preparation, exploration, envisionment, operationalization, assessment, and reflection. I was brainstorming for weeks with Matthew Mitka of Greater Than Learning, Greater Than Design, an organization you can find online. And Matthew shared words like explore, he shared words like common sense making. And these are very powerful terms as depicted here. And you can see again at the bottom of each one of these phases, different ways of eliciting data, basically your data collection phase, and then you analyze that data to actually come closer to enacting a solution and refining. To the next part of the presentation, describing co-design approach and the philosophy and ethos. So traditional design thinking is mostly in the office, basically your consultant office or a service provider office or company office. Your user-centered design is almost like a 50-50. You're in and out of the office. You are talking with users in the field, but your truly participatory design means that you're almost always out of the office. You're consulting with users. You're talking to users about what they need. And it is more radical. It does take a leap of faith. It does mean that you're trusting the end user to tell you the truth. And you've got a handle on who are the best people to actually ask. And how do you ensure that? At its guts, co-design is to be led by the people, led by the end users. It's a co-production. It's also designing with people and the planet. We can't forget, it's not just people, it's the environment, fauna, flora, the atmosphere, sources of energy, and all of these things that typify sustainability of the human and the earth and species. It means that we're not going to become nor endangered or extinct. But this is the empowerment side. This is as it says here, these things are transformational at best. These are the former, to design at people, excuse me, or design for people. But when we design with people and we empower people so much in this process that it's led by the people, you're going to have the embracing of the new processes, technology, or new technologies themselves. And so we're going from this traditional mindset that says, let's make decisions for people with lived experience. Let's value professional experience above all else. Marginalized people are a burden. For example, I'm not going to go and talk to a homeless person. What's the homeless people know? They're usually uneducated, aren't they? Right? That's pretty much the mentality. And a rush to solutions. How many times have I been in corporate meetings and meetings with clients where they've said, oh, I think it should be another mobile app. If you can see that, there we go. And that's wrong. There's an app for that, is that famous adage. So this co-production right in the center is where we bring on the end user as not just co-designer, but co-producer. They have just as much ownership in the project, if not more, than the designers and the developers. And it's really about empowerment. How can we empower people like First Nations people in Canada or Native Americans in the US to go, you know what, we've been on multiple projects like this. We think we can start our own internet service provider. We think we can actually securely store our own data that's generated. We think we can create open source platforms for others. And so it takes time and money, it takes commitment. Imagine like interviewing, 100 stakeholders. How do you identify who should be at the table? Is it done in small group roundtables in the same day in a town hall kind of format? Who has that commitment? Is there funding to actually ensure that the key stakeholders come and share their stories? Who's going to record all the data from these interviews and these focus groups and these surveys? And what are you going to do with it? And after the project timeline is finished, then what happens to the project? Is it left on its own? A lot of these challenges are the same in the humanitarian technology space. What you hope for is for people to feel so empowered that the next time around they can actually keep doing the same kind of project completely on their own. So you need to think about the culture and the climate and support and sponsor the project. Find those donors that believe in it. And here we have some more notes that you can read in your own time. So your own PIT project journey this semester, I'm very excited. It takes off in about 7 days. That's when you declare what project you're working on. So please reach out to your peers on the community board. Start sharing, don't wait. You don't have to write copious messages and you don't have to write detailed ones. I'm happy if you just post and encourage one another and just say hi, introduce who you are. I know that Jason Robertson and myself have already done something on Mural, which is a bit of fun, we've called it, on how we use those icons to describe how we might look and how we might act and how we might be. And Jason, I really enjoyed your Mural depiction of who you were. So a PIP project is not like a Shark Tank proposal, okay? You're not even going to use the same language. This is completely different. This hasn't got to do with how much money you're going to make and if you don't make enough, get out, or how much margin you're going to do on each product innovation, or how many of this or that you could flog off so that you can make sure that you're afloat and I would invest in you, 12% of the take or whatever. My kids and I went through a phase where we were in an international hotel and just feasting on Shark Tank episodes. So we laughed at so many of them. The younger ones were only little, but this is really different. Okay, so you've got your general pitches and then you've got pitches for like public interest tech and they will bamboozle you. They are really different. I've provided an example online. One example is corporate. That's one I was involved in when we pitched an idea to the Schmidt Foundation with Professor Thad Miller, who's now in the University of Massachusetts. And on the other hand, I've also provided for you a public PowerPoint that I believe was dedicated to the Aboriginal people in Western Australia, but I could be wrong. I'm just trying to remember the exact details of that PowerPoint. But there are different proposals and they're just examples. I mean, you can choose whatever format you wish. So which type of user or citizen are you considering to work with? I have this in module 1's opening page. Is it someone with a disability, someone who doesn't have access to education, the very young or the elderly who may be in a power struggle with a particular service or service provider, people who are single parents or carers, people who are migrants or refugees, those with mental health concerns, those who are homeless, those who are unemployed, those who are Indigenous people, who've been incarcerated, who are members of the LGBTIQA plus community, who have been subject to abuse and violence, who are members of a religious minority or even majority, and who belong to a low socioeconomic status. Now, that's not all the types of users. Please know you can choose whatever you wish in order to achieve your dream and your goals in terms of which user or citizen you'll be working with. But the only advice I have for you is to say to you, they have to be accessible. No matter which user you choose, the end user has to be accessible if you're going to interview them. So if you're in one big group of 10, I want to see 10 individual stakeholder interviews, perhaps on the homeless, or perhaps on the unemployed, or perhaps on young children, whatever that might be, in whatever context it might be. You could choose arenas of equity, as the Creative Reaction Lab has done. I think they're in Missouri. So is it gender? Is it physical health related, racial or ethnic, religious motivation, age, ability status, sexual orientation, mental health, or anything else that is relevant to you? And it doesn't have to be social. It can be environmental. Like, who's going to give voice to the rivers? Who's going to give voice to the dying fish in the Murray-Darling here in Australia? Who's going to give voice to the catchment management areas that have been neglected and are now in a place of salination? All of these things need to be considered. And I'm not opposed to the environment. I'm not opposed to looking at soil salinity, for example, or deforestation, or climate change. And these are fairly big projects. And what I'm going to force you to do is start scoping. Because one of the best things that you could do is to choose to do a project for a local community. And what I always talk about, and what ASU talks about, is local solutions at scale globally. So you test it out, you pilot it out, perhaps in Arizona, in Phoenix, in Tempe, and then you think big. How can you take this solution, these outcomes, and scale it at large across the world? And so that leads me to, what is your pit passion? Why did you do pit? What do you hope to get out of it? And this is the way I want you to think about it. If I had one wish, it would be what in public interest tech? And what really irks me in the morning or in the evening, what makes my blood boil is, okay, finish that sentence. And if the first and second sort of are correlated, you're pretty much on the topic. And maybe that's what I want you to do. I want you to openly share. What do you like about the world? What don't you like about the world? What do you think you can fix or at least change? And so if you could change the world that little bit, how might you do that? Would it be in your local neighborhood? Would it be in a community group? Would it be at your local church? And have you thought about what drives you? What is it about you that makes you care so much? And care is a central tenet of both the center I run, the Society Policy Engineering Collective, and also this course right through. Again, what keeps you up at night? And finding that pit project to work on. Let's hone into this butterfly. Let's say this butterfly was endangered. Could you as a group co-design the future to ensure that this species survives? And how would you do that? Who would you bring to the table? Who are the specialists? Who are those people that know about insects and things that fly like this? So does PIT imply a technological solution? Yes. But co-design is an approach, and we're talking about co-design. I'm really wanting you to focus on both co-design and public interest tech, but also to remember what I said at the beginning of this lecture, which is that tech doesn't have to be glitzy. It can be a product, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a platform, doesn't have to be. It could be a novel methodology or a process or a coordination effort, a collaborative context. But it could involve lots of technologies like drones, biometrics, citizen ID cards, citizen science approaches, CRM, customer relationship management, workflow mapping, and other things. So you identify your project. Can you get access to information? You need to be able to do desk studies. Where are you going to find the data? It's not just going to be in a half an hour or 60-minute interview. Where's the rest of the information going to come from? Could be newspapers locally, could be other archival sources. You might be able to talk to a friend who works for someone who has some kind of background. We'll be using Mural as a platform, and you may want to jot down who are the stakeholders and use this T to basically come out with You need to keep satisfied these particular people, actively engage others, keep informed others, and monitor others. Some people may be more passive than directly active. And here you are on the left-hand side, basically jotting down all the stakeholders, excuse me. So who might you interview? 2 years ago, I had the great joy of correspondence with a former colleague of mine at the University of Wollongong, Professor Justin Yerbury, who suffers from motor neuron disease, MND. And Justin, with a group of uh, 3 others, was able to publish how technology has benefited him in his current circumstance, but also some of the shortcomings and things to be aware of. Salah Hamdoun, your classmate, who's also my research assistant, worked on that paper with Professor Yerbury and the other individuals, and it was very successful. But you have to have access. Now, given I had introduced Professor Yerbury over so many years in different contexts and knew him as a colleague at URW, that we were in different faculties. I was in engineering and he was in science. You still meet people at a smaller university. So how will you contact the user? Is it a cold call? How will you warn them? What's your invitation email look like? When do you need a response by? And who are the key users? Who is the best person? Imagine you come up with the best idea, but the end user interviews are just not going to help you with a pain chain chart. What do you do? They're not going to help you with identifying problems. What do you do? And so this is where I need you to start really ticking. The richer your data, the more brilliant your project. And there's often a trade-off here over access to certain individuals who are in high demand for different reasons. So finally, just as a taster and a welcome, here are all the key words. This is one way that I'll post each week so that you think about, now what did I learn in that lecture? How does it link back to the learning outcomes? But welcome, friends, and so happy to have you with us at Arizona State University. And I can't wait to see what the semester has for you to come. Very moved, given I'm also your program chair and spent 2 years of my life putting this whole degree together. To see this actually come in through action and to see the first cohort come through is especially endearing. So congratulations before you've even started, and thanking you so much.